to Move Better Every Day, my mini workshop. Today we're going to look at flexibility or mobility. So do we really need to be super flexible for every day? I would suggest not. And when I was doing my research for this today, having a bit of a think about what I was going to do, I looked up on the internet like you do, and there was someone sort of sitting on the floor in the butterfly, so soles of the feet together, knees out to the side, sitting with a really upright spine, and then lifting the arms up and rotating. And that was supposed to be flexibility for beginners. And I was like, oh my gosh, you know, it's slightly crazy, isn't it? So we don't need, for everyday movements, we don't need a huge amount of flexibility, but we do need a certain level of flexibility. So if, for instance, you do your mini hip hinge, one of the really key movements to do every day, so you're keeping your back in its natural curves and you just pitch forwards and stick your bottom out. If that already causes you to feel really bad tightness in your hamstrings, then you need to do some work on your flexibility of your hamstrings. But we don't need to be doing the splits. We don't need that. So not for every day anyway, and this is what this whole thing is about every day. So I'm going to just sort of work my way through various body parts and have a little look and try and find the relevance of them for every day. So the first thing I thought about today was hands and wrists. So why do we want flexible hands and wrists? We want flexible hands and wrists for gripping primarily. So grip strength is something that we lose. And again, with all of this stuff, if you don't use it, you lose it. So if you don't do your flexibility, you know, trying to stretch muscles out, then gradually everything becomes smaller and more restricted. If you don't ever practice your balance, you will not be able to balance very well. If you don't practice and strengthen and keep your wrists and your hands strong and keep your wrist grip strength working and moving, you will lose it. So, and we all know the feeling of when you're trying to open a jar or something and you've lost that strength. And actually grip strength is something that we quite often forget about. So just, actually before we do any of this as well, so there's a big difference for me between stretching, trying to gain flexibility and trying to lengthen a muscle or a muscle group, and mobilising. So generally for me, in order to stretch, I need to be warm. My muscles need to be warm, I need my heart rate to be up a little bit, and that's the mobilising side of it. But for me also, the mobilising side of it gives me my flexibility. So it's like mobilising is what we need for every day, and maybe the stretching side of it is what you need to take your body a little bit further. So say you're wanting to do the splits. That might be a goal for you, and then you are going to have to really work on stretching those muscles, because everyday mobilising it won't happen unless you're uber flexible, which also has its issues. So let's just look at, before we even start any grip strengthening, wrist stretching, let's do some sea anemones to get the blood flow to the hands, the fingers, the wrists. And what this should actually make happen in your body as you start to do it, you should feel a nice warmth coming along your forearm. And when we look to strengthen and stretch, I must stop saying strengthen actually, we're looking at flexibility, sorry. So when we're looking at stretching the wrists, primarily you're actually stretching this area. And everything is about going to the edges of your movement capacity for now, if you like. Good, and then I'm just going to make a really strong fist and just hold that nice and tight. And again, this will increase the blood flow to the area. And then relaxing it. And now I'm stretching fingers and thumbs out really nice and wide. So where this would be, where something that I would do in my classes, for instance, would be where we're on all fours. And quite often people will say to me, well, my wrists are tight, my wrists are weak. So just coming down onto all fours, stretching fingers and thumbs far apart so that you're sort of spreading the load over the wrists. Start with your fingertips forwards. Now this doesn't have to be down on the floor on all fours. It could be on your kitchen worktop, because I'm in my studio, not the kitchen. So which is why I brought my trusty chair in. So this is something you could do on your chair. Preferably a harder chair, but if it's feeling a bit uncomfortable, it might not be a bad idea to have a cushioned seat. And we're going to play around with the position of the hands to stretch the forearms and the wrists. So, but I'm going to come down to the floor for the moment. So I'm down here. So average position is shoulders over the hands, fingertips facing forwards, and then just turn your hands out to the side. And so what's quite nice about this, whether you're on the kitchen worktop, whether you're on the chair, play about, so this is the mobilising side of it for me, play about with just moving in and out of the stretch and in and out of the tight areas. So initially I was going forwards and backwards, and what's nice about being down on the floor is you can control how much weight you put through your wrist and over your hands by where you place your hips. Same thing on the chair. Chair is probably better than being on the kitchen worktop because you can be above it a little bit more. So that's feeling okay, and then the other thing I'd like to try is just circling the shoulders around a little bit. So that's something I'm very used to. If you're not used to that, so something that might be a little bit uncomfortable here is the angle at your wrist. So again, when we're in class, what I might encourage people to do is just to have their wrist, but just the heel of their palm on the edge of the mat. And my mats aren't very big, so it just lessens that angle there. It's not so much of a right angle, but equally that might be something that you actually need to work on. Just roll that back up again. So that's relatively easy. That's a little bit more uncomfortable. Now I'm going to take my fingers facing backwards. Ooh, okay, really quite different, really quite a strong stretch. Yeah, and the stretch, I'm feeling the stretch down my forearm. And just gently rocking backwards and forwards, and especially when this sort of thing becomes quite uncomfortable, make sure you're breathing. So when you're trying to stretch, and especially when it's really tight and uncomfortable, as I said, really try not to hold your breath. You need to relax. You need to think about the blood flow going to that muscle area where you're stretching. You need to think about the muscle relaxing and almost softening. Visualize it softening. So there is another one that the GMB guys use, and this is really quite odd. So again, I've got my hips right back practically on my heels so that I'm not putting too much pressure down here, because this does feel very strange. So just to have the backs of your hands, and then just very gently, and you realise after a little bit, yes, it's uncomfortable, but I'm not going to snap my hands off. It's just a little bit uncomfortable. And that's something that you learn when you are, so let's try also lifting the, I'm going to say that feels quite nice. You might not call it nice, but when you get into stretching and mobilising a little bit more, there's a certain level of discomfort. You might call it pain, but I actually quite like it, and you get to know the difference between that level of discomfort and it's a low level of pain, but you know that it's doing the job of stretching. So what I did then was I just lifted the heels of my palms up, and I sort of bent over at my first joint in the hand, if you like, and then just have a little roll from side to side. And then what I feel like doing, and I always really encourage my people to really think about or not think too much. What do you feel like doing? What do you instinctively want to do? Because that is the right thing. So if you've hurt your back, if you've put your back out or something, you will touch the area. You will, when your shoulder's all tight, you'll want to rub it. You'll want to put your hand there to get the heat. Your body is telling you what you need to be doing, basically. Okay, so hands and wrists, grip strength. We're pushing, we're pulling, we're carrying stuff. Really important to just get that stretched out and just for it to feel good, for it to feel supple, and so that it doesn't feel uncomfortable. So let's go to the other extreme, calves. Now I've got particularly tight calves and a tight Achilles tendon, and it doesn't restrict me. It doesn't restrict me in everyday life. It definitely restricts me when I want to do my deep squat because I struggle to keep my heels on the floor. If the calves are really tight, it's going to affect your walking pattern. So deep squats, one of the 10 things we need to do every day. Your walking pattern is one of the 7 primal movement patterns. Your gait is a primal movement pattern. So, and also we tend to ignore the calves a little bit. So a great stretch is going to be, I'm going to go over here actually against the door. So you put your hands up against the wall. Take one leg back, so this is the leg that I'm stretching, and you want the hips to be forwards. If your bottom's out there, that's not going to happen. And the leg is quite straight, but really importantly, and if I go this way, really importantly with that back foot, is that it's straight, it's facing forwards. What you'll probably find you do a little bit, I'm exaggerating it, is it turns out a little bit. Don't let that happen, you won't actually feel the stretch. So the foot is really straight, the instep is straight, the heel is directly behind the toes. You're leaning forwards but not sticking your bottom out. So let me come back to this diagonal line again. So I'm already feeling quite a stretch there. I remember working in one of the gyms, and a lady had very, very long Achilles, and she was basically had her heel flat but her leg was right back there. It's quite incredible. Sort of the opposite extreme of me. So holding it, breathing. So this isn't necessarily one that you would move in and out of or wiggle about with. You don't really need to. So let's swap legs. So pushing the heel down, and now I really feel this in the bulk of my calf. I'm going to try a slightly different stretch in a moment. So as I said the other day, the thing with stretching, when you're stretching, you want to be actually focusing on the stretching, not focusing on balancing. So for me, because my Achilles are quite tight, if I'm doing this sort of freestanding, I'm actually struggling to keep my balance. I'm not struggling to keep my balance, but I'm focusing more on my balance and the position of my legs, and I'm not really getting an effective stretch there. Whereas if I take that pressure off of the rest of my body, if you like, to be in the perfect position, and I haven't got to worry about my balance here now, so all I'm focusing on is that calf stretch. So another nice one here, I'm going to swap legs again, is to hold it there and then just bend your knee, just soften your knee. So I'm starting with a straight leg, and then when you just slightly soften the knee, that will go much more into your Achilles. Into your Achilles, and it stretches the other half of your calf muscle as well. And that's really strong for me. So it feels like it's almost like a burning stretch at the top of my sock, if you like. So making sure you do both sides. So holding it maybe for a count of 10 and then releasing it. Maybe just holding it for a good 30 seconds. And then you could do something like this. So we've warmed the area up, if you like. You could straighten the leg and then bend the knee. Straighten the leg and bend the knee. So, and then I feel like just giving it a bit of a wiggle. And maybe we could have done some mobilising first of all, standing on one leg, circling the ankle around, get the blood flow there. So for everyday life, not necessarily something that you might think about, but again, a really good stretch. Some of these things, if you're like my lady at the gym who's got the leg all the way back there and her heels still down, you probably don't need to actually stretch your calves, but someone like me does. So it's all about just understanding, learning about your own body, finding out what's going on there. Hip flexors, front of your hips, big muscle group. Again, one of the 10 things to do every day. This comes back to our everyday habit, our modern day habit of sitting so much. Where we sit so much, these muscles become tight, but they also become quite weak. And so the effect it has is it just disrupts our overall posture because we just spend too much time sitting. So how do we stretch out those hip flexors? Couple of ways. I like to do this sort of mini lunge position. So you've got a bit of support. Again, you don't want to be worrying about falling over. A bit of support, back of a chair, kitchen worktop, a wall, doesn't matter. Legs are slightly wider maybe than hip width apart. And front to back, my body is in the middle of both legs. So equally weighted between both legs, I guess. And then I'm just going to bend both knees equally. So at the moment my pelvis is just in my neutral position. From there, I'm really going to try and tuck under with my pelvis. Now my hip flexors are actually really quite tight. And so I can really feel straight away quite a strong stretch there at the front of the hip. So tucking the pelvis under. If you're not really feeling it much, make sure that you've tucked the pelvis under, you've tilted the pelvis. So it's like my pubic bone is really lifted. Try not to change anything else in the rest of your body position, your upper body position. And if you're not feeling it much, and if you want to increase it more, stretch that back leg out. So straighten the back leg out, but don't take the heel down. If you take the heel down, it becomes something completely different. Well, basically it becomes the calf stretch that we just did. So knees are bent equally. My weight is in the middle. I've tucked my pelvis under. Going to hold that pelvic tilt. So I'm really trying to push my pubic bone forwards. And I'm trying to straighten my back leg, but the stretch is so strong around my groin that I can't really go anywhere, and that's fine. That's what I'm after. And breathing. Holding that there. So again, not one where you're going to move about too much in, but you can, having said that. So you can maybe just bend and straighten that back leg a little bit. Check it out. How does it feel? Great. Let's swap sides. That's quite hard work on the front leg thigh, but that's again something that we this is a strong position, our lunging position. So again, the lunge is one of the 7 primal moves we were doing the other day, lunging or kneeling back to do your shoes up, put your socks on maybe, kneeling down. It's a very important movement. Okay, so we're starting with the legs slightly wider than hip width apart. Hips and shoulders are facing the side of the wall. Always when you're stretching as well, you want to be in good alignment. I'm bending both knees, my chest is upright. I'm going to tuck the pelvis under. Switching that buttock on will help as well. So that's already a strong stretch for me. Right in this crease at the front of the hip. You might start to feel it going down the front of the thigh as well. If you can, stay there and then try and straighten out that back leg. And hold and breathe. And then maybe soften the knee, try and straighten the leg, soften the knee, try and straighten the leg. Watch that the pelvis doesn't join in with the movement. And that might be enough. So if that was quite strong, which it really is quite strong, you could maybe try being kneeling down. So maybe you need the chair to kneel down. So that's going to go this way. So you're kneeling down, you could have a towel or a cushion underneath that knee. Same thing here, but now you want to drive the hips forwards if you can. So that in itself should be a stretch at the front of the hip. And then if you want to add to it, try and tuck that pelvis under. And that will give you the same stretch as when we were standing and straightening out that back leg. So this stronger stretch, for me, it wraps around the inside of my groin as well. And then most importantly, the chest is really upright. So this doesn't work if you're here. So if you're in just a 90-degree angle, pelvis is in neutral, it might work if you can tuck the pelvis under, but ideally you want to be forwards with that thigh. And this front knee needs to be above the ankle. And just lifting the hips, lifting the chest. Let's swap sides. So kneeling and then driving the hips forwards, keeping the chest nice and upright. Tucking the pelvis under a little bit, breathing. Noticing what happens when you try and tuck the pelvis under. It won't move anywhere, it can't, because of the position you've put your pelvis in by taking the hips forward. So it can't really tuck under, but you can definitely increase the stretch. Great, and coming back. Okay, this is leading me towards hamstrings. So we did a little bit of hamstrings the other day when we were looking at putting your socks on and shoes on. As I said, this is probably the bare minimum test. If you're struggling with a basic mini hip hinge, which is just a bend forwards, just a hinge from the hips, and that's already feeling tight on your hamstrings, then it's likely that they do need to be stretched a little bit. So you can do this lying on your back, but I'm trying to avoid sort of getting you down on the floor too much. I'm trying to avoid, especially at this moment in time where a lot of us are sitting. So try and maybe do some of these stretches as a break from sitting at your chair, especially if you're working from home. But just get up, and while you're waiting for the kettle to boil or something, or chatting to someone, just do a little calf stretch. Actually, coming back to the calf stretch, I just remembered a really great thing. So stairs are the other thing, and again, obviously I haven't got any stairs in here. A brilliant one for stretching your calves is to be, in fact I'm going to go closer to the wall so I don't worry about falling over. The ball of your foot on the stairs, standing up nice and tall, and then just let that heel hang down. I'm being a bit tame with that because I've got 2 bricks. Being a bit scared. Yeah, so there. And well, you can see really, again, it's my tight Achilles. And again, you can bend the knee, but still have the heel dropping off the edge of the stair. Good. Or, I'm getting right into the calves now. Or foot up at the door. But again, for me, I struggle with this one, and pitch forwards. So you're basically trying to get your foot on an angle. Yeah, that's not a very effective one for me, which is probably why I didn't do it. So, stairs. So using the stairs for your calf stretch is a possibility. Using your stairs for your hamstring stretch, and or your low settee, a poof if you happen to have one. So for this one, leg on the, or a chair, but that might be a little bit high, leg on the thing that you're resting your leg on, bend the other knee, check that everything is nice and neutral in your spine, you're nice and upright, and again all you're going to do, and this is actually quite strong, is take a mini hip hinge. So I've got this leg straight, that's really quite important. If your leg is bent, you can just about stretch your hamstrings, but legs are built to be straight. When your leg is straight, when the stretch will come all the way around to the back of the knee, maybe to your calf if everything is really tight. And then so here's something to move around within it, is to let that foot relax down and pull it up. Foot relax down and pull it up. So if you're someone that was really tight in the hamstrings when you're just doing that mini hip hinge, have your foot on the floor. It's fine. Make sure you stick your bottom out. So this is, I'm still getting a stretch here. It's just not as intense. Lowering the foot, picking it back up. Good, maybe holding it there, so maybe moving for a little bit and then just trying to tweak it a little bit more. So as with everything, when we're training, when we're working with our bodies, if you just stop, so I'm on the other leg now, bending your standing leg, other leg in front, if you just stop at the point of pain, tiredness, feeling the stretch, if you just think, oh, that's enough for me, I've had enough, and you come out of the position or you stop doing the exercise you're doing, you basically will never improve. So you want to get stronger, fitter, better, more flexible every single time. So every single time you're doing some form of exercise, there's an opportunity to improve. And the reason for that is because the body, let's take that foot down, toes down and up, the body is so amazing at adapting. So people have said to me in the past, you know, guys who they're builders, they say, well, I work all day, every day, I'm out there doing, you know, doing my physical stuff, pushing and pulling, and absolutely they are. But because they do that all day, every day, there's no training effect, there's no benefit. Your body, their bodies have adapted 100% to do what they need to do every day, and because they're never going out of that bubble, if you like, there's no improvement. So let's take this foot down to the floor, then do this one more time, sending that bottom back. Ooh. So hamstrings are a biggie, because it's going to affect your hip hinge mainly. This is the biggie. So if the hamstrings are tight, lower back is tight, every time you go to bend forwards, you're changing the shape of the spine. It's going to be, so hip hinge, this movement here, hinging from the hips, which is your sit to stand action, sitting and standing in a chair. Send the bottom back, hinging at the hips. There's no change in the shape of your spine, so you need to be able to do that as an absolute bare minimum. What else have we got for the hip hinge? Your deep squat, hamstring length, but actually more than that, getting down to the floor. So down to the floor and being able to reach and pick things up, because it comes from the hip hinge. So the hips are nice and high, and I'm getting here I'm actually getting a stretch on my hamstrings slightly. So a more advanced version, and this is the sort of stuff that you're going to see on the YouTube all the time, is coming down with your feet wide, maybe your feet nice and parallel, your hands touching the floor. So generally when people first start to come to my classes and they haven't done any exercise for a while, or they're just out of condition and the hamstrings are really tight, they will be here, they will be a long way off of the floor, and that's absolutely fine. So the safest way to stretch your hamstrings, to get your backs of those legs working, is to take the hip hinge. And to take the hip hinge, so now I'm looking at my feet being much wider, taking the hip hinge, but to the point of where you find your hamstrings are starting to stretch. So it's not about being as low as I am with your shoulders all rounded, because that is terrible. That's just you're reinforcing bad posture, stressing your lower back. That's the word I was looking for there. and you're actually not stretching your hamstrings. So if you only go this far forwards, that's probably maybe a little bit too far for some people, but you can feel a stretch on your hamstrings and everything's in the right place, you're in good alignment, then that's where you need to be. Hold that there. Ultimately, yes, we're looking at being able to touch. So for me, my minimum length of hamstrings with my clients is straightish legs and being able to touch the toes, just being able to touch the toes. And the narrower the feet are together, the harder it is. So if you're starting out, take the feet nice and wide and you're just reaching down. Ideally, start with the hip hinge and the flat back, or the back in its natural curves. When you're able to, start to bend those knees, get the knees over the toes, let your back relax and round, and then you want to be straightening and bending the knees. When I'm bending my knees here, I'm not, that's not part of the stretch. The stretch is here, trying to get straight legs. Here's another tool that's quite handy. Again, maybe on the settee, maybe a low chair, maybe a couple of blocks or something. Hands forwards, and then you're just, again, aiming to get those legs straight. We're aiming to get our hands down towards the floor. When I bend my knees, it's not because that's part of the exercise, it's because I'm releasing the stretch. So straightening the legs, releasing the stretch. So it's not a great big knee bend. That would be something if we were looking more at the hips. Well done. I think I'm going to leave that there today because I've gone over a little bit on the time, although I started late. So we've done hands, wrists, forearms, calves, hip flexors and hamstrings. Watch this space for more of the same. Please let me know how you found it, and I hope to see you again soon. Thank you very much.